Hi, my name is Brian Lee. I'm 19. I'm a sophomore in college, studying to become a physician. And today I wanted to talk about something that I've really never talked about before, which is my story with mental health. I grew up in a very traditional Asian household, and growing up, there were a handful of subjects that I knew never to talk about. Academic failure being one of them, but especially mental health was something that was never talked about within my family. My family is from Vietnam, and looking back, I realized that I had put a lot of pressure on myself because of my parents. I grew up with the belief that just me being born here, I had taken something away from them, something intangible that I could never put my finger on. And I don't know why I've always felt this way because it was never like communicated to me. I just have always felt this drive to somehow justify my parents' sacrifice. And I think it was because growing up, I saw my parents working really hard to put food on the table for me and my little sister. They would go to work, and when they weren't at work, they would be at community college learning English. And even then, they still found the time to, spend time with me and my little sister and asks about our days at school. Growing up, I also could feel that there was something wrong with me. I would get these periods of intense sadness that you would probably call depression, but I didn't have words for at the time. Mental health just wasn't a thing that I was ever aware of growing up. I still remember telling my dad once when I was little that I was feeling sad and that I wanted it to stop. And his response was essentially just get over it. It's not real. And to our detriment, I'm sure a lot of Asian American kids growing up have heard the same thing. But that's not to say that I blame my parents because as immigrants they live shoulder to shoulder with poverty and near starvation. Their experiences were reinforced by a culture that regarded mental illness as a weakness of character. It was a shame borne not only by the individual but by the entire family. And my family and many others like mine have learned just to endure in silence and just hope never to speak of it. And this is what I did in high school. I became the poster child for the high functioning depressive, as the terminology goes. I maintained good grades. I was on the school swim team. I was involved in student organization, was a leader of the Asian American Student Association at one point. And this made me a role model for some of the younger students in the Asian American community. I was even asked for lifestyle tips on how to succeed in school. Aunts and uncles would tell me that they were proud of me at family gatherings and would tell my younger cousins to be more like me. But from the outside, no one could tell that I had been battling depression for all those years because I had hidden it well. Until one day it became just too painful to hide. Because despite having succeeded, at least in terms of how our society and my culture especially believes a 16-year-old high school student should succeed, nothing had changed for me internally. There were still times where I felt extreme sadness. I started getting panic attacks for the first time in my life. And it was like I would walk into a room full of my classmates and the air was just taken out of my lungs. It started happening more frequently, and I had no idea what I was doing wrong. I started to lose confidence in myself. I remember feeling like I didn't have control over my body or my emotions. And when my panic attacks were at their worst, I just couldn't leave the house. Just the thought of leaving the house and going to school put me in such a state of panic that I just had to stay put. Sometimes for 2 weeks on end, I was just miserable. And I remember one day I got out the door and I got to the end of my road, just around the corner, and I ran back inside. I remember feeling powerless to help myself for so long. And I think somewhere along the way, I gave up and I made a drastic decision. I came home, locked the door to the bathroom, and I wrote a suicide letter planning on taking my own life then and there. And as I began removing one of the blades off of my dad's shaving razor, my mom came by and knocked on the door. She asked me if I was okay. I was panicked and I told her I was fine. She left and I dropped the razor and I lay there on my back staring up at the ceiling. It was only then that I realized something, and I had known this before, but here's when it really sank in. My death wasn't just about me. I began imagining how this would affect my family, my little sister who would be coming home in a few hours from school. It would completely destroy the lives of those I cared most about. And I imagined my mom suffering until her dying day, blaming herself. And luckily, after that, I didn't do anything. Not a day goes by where I'm not grateful that things turned out the way they did. I still reread that suicide note that I wrote as a reminder to be thankful because I gave myself a second chance, and not everyone does. It's also a powerful reminder for me to live this second chance and to do it right. So, this past June, I celebrated 2 years of being panic attack free. I've been at college. I've decided I would study to become a physician. I'm a research assistant in a lab on campus that studies the brain. And in the future, through understanding, I hope we can improve the way in which our society views and approaches mental illness. Although my studies have been tough, I've been careful to heed the lessons I've learned in the past. Whereas once I was isolating myself to achieve good grades and to make my parents proud, now I know to never lose sight of my friends and forego my social support network, even when the work piles up. As a result, college has been a wonderful journey and a much needed fresh start. Already, I've met some people and mentors I know I'll remember for the rest of my life. And we have each other's backs, which means a lot because good friends can be hard to come by. I once believed that success was a precursor to happiness. I know now that it was actually the other way around, that happiness is a precursor to success. It may be a small rearrangement of words, but for me, this has made all the difference. I want my story to be an example of why there is a striking need to consider cultural factors when discussing mental illness. To deny culture has a role to play in mental illness is to effectively deny the concept of mental illness altogether, since mental illness itself is defined as patterns of behavior that deviate from cultural expectations. I would also like to encourage you, anyone who is fighting their own battle with mental illness, to never stop reminding yourself that in times of difficulty, in times of sorrow, that you have gifts to share the world. You are not alone. You are not flawed. You are human. And these lessons, these gems that you pick up along the way are forged in the struggle. You still have your story to tell, so never give up. My name is Brian, and my story is my superpower.